Welcome to part 2 of the Titanic's fateful journey. If you haven't caught part 1 yet, make sure to give it a watch before diving into this one. Chapter 6. Aftermath and Impact. The movie Titanic provided a detailed account of the tragic disaster. But what happened next? Let's dive into the aftermath. In the aftermath of that fateful night, the North Atlantic held the echoes of tragedy, and the world grappled with the somber reality of the Titanic's demise. The impact of the disaster would resonate across continents, shaping the course of maritime history and leaving an indelible mark on collective consciousness. News of the Titanic's sinking reverberated across the globe. Headlines told a tale of loss, heroism, and the stark fragility of human endeavors. Memorial services on both sides of the Atlantic echoed with grief as communities mourned the lives lost at sea. Billed as the most luxurious ocean experience available, about 1,500 people died when the Titanic sank into the ocean depths within hours after impact with the iceberg. Only 700 passengers and crew members survived to be rescued by the RMS Carpathia. A number of very wealthy, important people died in the tragedy. Among many of the era's wealthiest and most prominent families, there were Isidore and Ida Strauss, Benjamin Guggenheim and John Jacob Astor. For a lot of people, the status of the victims amplified the tragedy of the ship's sinking. Despite the fact that the majority of the people who died in the incident were crew members and third-class passengers. In the wake of the disaster, survivors emerged with harrowing tales, stories etched in their memory, seared by the cold and the darkness. Their first-hand accounts painted a vivid picture of the chaos and the resilience that defined that tragic night. Both heroes and villains were created in the wake of the Titanic. The heroes included passengers like widow and heiress Molly Brown, a.k.a. the unsinkable Molly Brown, who played a key role in helping to organize the lifeboats. Maintain calm and order while the lifeboats were being loaded and boosting the spirits of her fellow survivors. And the captain of the Carpathia, Arthur Henry Rostron, who came to the ship's rescue. The villains, on the other hand, included passengers who were rumored to have been unhelpful in the ship's sinking, like Joseph Bruce Ismay, the White Star Line's chairman who took a place in the lifeboats before women and children. Insufficient lifeboats. The Titanic left for New York City with an estimated 2,240 passengers on board. Of those, only 705 survived. One of the reasons so few people survived was the lack of lifeboats. All of the emergency vehicles and lifeboats combined were just 16 lifeboats which could hold 1,176 passengers. The total capacity for the Titanic was 3,320 people, so the lifeboat-to-passenger ratio was way off. So, the ship carried far fewer lifeboats than needed to accommodate all passengers and crew. Inevitably, even if each lifeboat had been filled to maximum capacity, there were nowhere near enough boats to save everyone on board when disaster struck, contributing to the tragic loss of life. To make matters worse, many of the lifeboats were lowered into the water early, with space still left for more passengers. Therefore, fewer people got the chance to escape. The pattern of underfilling lifeboats continued throughout the evacuation, largely due to the panicked and chaotic nature of the situation. So, the lifeboats that had been lowered were only filled up to an average of 60%. The poorly organized evacuation also meant that the standard rule of women and children first was not always followed. Typical procedure would be that all women and children be boarded onto lifeboats first. Only when all of these people were safe, would men be allowed to evacuate the ship. However, amidst the pandemonium of the final hours on the Titanic, many men slipped onto lifeboats, leaving women and children behind to perish, the result of disorderly procedures that failed to get them to the boats in the first place. In the end, due to the lack of lifeboats and underfilling, only 705 passengers survived while more than 1,500 perished. Women and children survived at rates of about 75% and 50%, while only 20% of men survived. though almost all of the survivors were from the first and second class cabins. Many of the third-class passengers, both men and women, were trapped in the lower parts of the ship. Aside from the crew, which had about 700 fatalities, third class suffered the greatest loss. Of approximately 710, only some 174 survived. Subsequent claims that passengers in steerage were prevented from boarding boats, however, were largely dispelled. Given Smith's failure to sound a general alarm, some third-class passengers did not realize the direness of the situation until it was too late. Many women also refused to leave their husbands and sons, while the difficulty of simply navigating the complex Titanic from the lower levels caused some to reach the top deck after most of the lifeboats had been launched. The vast majority of those who died when the Titanic sank fell victim to hypothermia as they trod water in the icy Atlantic. Second Officer Charles Lightoller, a survivor, described the shock of the water as being like 1,000 knives being driven into one's body. There was a strong desire to explain the tragedy, and inquiries into the sinking were held in the United States and Great Britain. As the world mourned, investigations unfolded to uncover the truths that lay beneath the waves. Inquiries delved into the design, decisions, and actions that led to the Titanic's tragic fate. In the courtroom, the story of the Titanic unfolded. Crew members, experts, and survivors provided testimonies, a quest for answers to understand the intricate web of events that led to the unthinkable. The two inquiries reached broadly similar conclusions. The regulations on the number of lifeboats that ships had to carry were out of date and inadequate. Captain Smith had failed to take proper heed of ice warnings. The lifeboats had not been properly filled or crewed. And the collision was the direct result of steaming into a dangerous area at too high a speed. Neither inquiry's findings listed negligence by IMM, aka International Mercantile Marine Company owned by J.P. Morgan, or the White Star Line as a factor. The American inquiry concluded that since those involved had followed standard practice, the disaster was an act of God. The British inquiry concluded that Smith had followed long-standing practice that had not previously been shown to be unsafe. Noting that British ships alone had carried 3.5 million passengers over the previous decade with the loss of just 10 lives. And concluded that Smith had done only that which other skilled men would have done in the same position. Lord Mersey, who presided as Wreck Commissioner, did, however, found fault with the extremely high speed which was maintained, following numerous ice warnings. Noting that what was a mistake in the case of the Titanic would without doubt be negligence in any similar case in the future. Both inquiries concluded the vessel had gone to the bottom. Blame for the incident fell on the ship's deceased captain, E.J. Smith, who was condemned for racing at 22 knots, aka 41 km per hour, aka 25 miles per hour through a known ice field in the dark waters off the coast of Newfoundland. The case of the Titanic was considered closed. Both the U.S. and British investigations also proposed various safety recommendations. The recommendations included strong suggestions for major changes in maritime regulations to implement new safety measures, such as ensuring that more lifeboats were provided, that lifeboat drills were properly carried out, and that wireless equipment on passenger ships was manned around the clock, etc. And in 1913, the first International Convention for Safety of Life at Sea was called in London. The conference drew up rules requiring that every ship have lifeboat space for each person embarked, that lifeboat drills be held for each voyage, and, because the Californian had not heard the distress signals of the Titanic, that ships maintain a 24-hour radio watch. The Titanic's sinking was not just a maritime tragedy, it was a catalyst for change. The maritime industry underwent a transformation, with safety becoming paramount, a poignant tribute to those who perished in the icy waters. In its wake, reforms were enacted to ensure such a catastrophe would never be repeated. Many of these maritime safety regulations were internationally incorporated into the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, aka SOLAS, in 1914. The convention has been updated by periodic amendments, with a completely new version adopted in 1974. Signatories to the convention followed up with national legislation to implement the new standards. For example, in Britain, new rules for life-saving appliances were passed by the Board of Trade on 8 May 1914, and then applied at a meeting of British steamship companies in Liverpool in June 1914. International Ice Patrol was established in 1914 by the agreement of 16 nations with shipping interests in the North Atlantic Ocean, after the Titanic collided with an iceberg and sank in 1912. To this day, it is an agency of the U.S. Coast Guard that monitors and reports the location of icebergs in the North Atlantic Ocean, which could pose a threat to transatlantic sea traffic. The agency issues warnings to ships in the vicinity and also participates in breaking up ice. In addition, they exchange information with the Canadian Ice Services, and collect information from ships operating in or passing through the ice area. Except for the years of the two world wars, the International Ice Patrol has worked each season since 1913. During the period, there has not been a single reported loss of life or property, due to collision with an iceberg in the patrol area. Approximately 1,000 icebergs are tracked each year. Destruction of dangerous icebergs has been attempted, but with little success. FYI, during the patrol season, which normally extends from March through August, they broadcast twice daily by Inmarsat satellite and by high-frequency radio facsimile, issuing reports on the locations of all known sea ice and icebergs. Further, the United States government passed the Radio Act of 1912. This act, along with the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, aka SOLAS, stated that radio communications on passenger ships would be operated 24 hours a day, along with a secondary power supply, so as not to miss distress calls. Also, the Radio Act of 1912 required ships to maintain contact with vessels in their vicinity as well as coastal onshore radio stations. It was agreed in the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea that the firing of red rockets from a ship must be interpreted as a sign of need for help. But, once the Radio Act of 1912 was passed, it was agreed that rockets at sea would be interpreted solely as distress signals. This agreement aimed to eliminate any possible misinterpretation by other ships, as exemplified by the SS Californian, which had been just a few miles from the Titanic but failed to recognize her rockets as distress signals. Unfortunate truth. In the same year, the Board of Trade chartered the bark Scotia to act as a weather ship in the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, keeping a lookout for icebergs. A Marconi wireless telegraph was installed to enable her to communicate with stations on the coast of Labrador and Newfoundland. As the remnants of the Titanic lie in eternal slumber on the ocean floor, the echoes of that tragic night continue to resonate, a reminder of the impermanence of human endeavors and the profound impact of a single voyage. Chapter 7. Locating Titanic. Why did it take so long to locate the Titanic? You might think it is a piece of cake to find the wreck of the Titanic because both Carpathia and Californian had previously been to the site and knew the coordinates. But, it's easier said than done. The uncertainty lies in the sinking process. The Titanic's descent wasn't strictly vertical. Even a slight deviation in the sinking direction could have a significant impact on its placement on the vast ocean floor. In other words, the ship had surely drifted during the more than 2 hours it took to sink. In reality, the search for the Titanic took a considerable amount of time, due to several challenges associated with locating a shipwreck at great depths in the vast ocean. Prior to the mid-1970s, there were no organized attempts to locate the Titanic wreckage. The ship's sinking in 1912 was a tragic event, and in the years following, there were no technological capabilities or specific efforts directed toward discovering its final resting place. In addition, the two world wars and other geopolitical events during the early to mid-20th century diverted attention and resources away from maritime exploration. The priority was often on more immediate concerns and global conflicts. So, the Titanic's final resting place had remained a mystery for over several decades. It wasn't until technological advancements, especially in sonar and underwater exploration, occurred in the latter half of the 20th century that serious attempts to locate the Titanic began. prompting various expeditions and exploratory missions. Throughout the 1960s and 1970s, various proposals were put forth to salvage the ship, ranging from using electromagnets and balloons to even considering ping-pong balls. However, all these ideas ran into practical and technological difficulties, faced a lack of funding, and, in many cases, suffered from a lack of understanding of the physical conditions at the wreck site. Although these earlier ideas got no further than the drawing board, they nonetheless laid the groundwork for subsequent explorations. Here comes Robert Ballard, the oceanographer from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, who has harbored a deep-seated interest in discovering the Titanic. In October 1977, he and a team set out for the North Atlantic, his first attempt to find the ship. Hopes were high. But then, just days into the voyage, a 50-ton piece of a drillship with sonar equipment and cameras attached to the end of the drilling pipe ended in failure when the drilling pipe broke. Sonar and other borrowed equipment, valued at $600,000, equivalent to about $2,900,000 in 2022, plunged into the sea. Devastated, Ballard returned home. Despite the failure of his 1977 expedition, Ballard had not given up hope, and devised new technologies and a new search strategy to tackle the problem. Submersibles enabled scientists like Ballard to glimpse the undersea world, but those journeys were perilous. Plus, submersibles could remain underwater for only a few hours at a time. Ballard had an idea for a new kind of remote-controlled submersible, one he called Argo. It was essentially an underwater robot equipped with sonar and cameras, towed behind a ship. A companion robot called Jason was tethered to it, capable of roaming the seafloor, capturing images, and collecting specimens. Like an octopus with cameras and lights clutched in every tentacle, Argo would capture footage over large underwater areas that scientists on the surface could view on TV screens. The new technology is a system called Argo Jason. The images from the system would be transmitted back to a control room on the towing vessel where they could be assessed immediately by the team on board. Although it was designed for scientific purposes, it also had important military applications. Ballard had a great system for underwater investigations. But he was having a hard time funding his project to discover the Titanic. So, in 1982, running out of money, Ballard approached the Navy and asked Deputy Chief of Naval Operations Ronald Thunman for funding to help find the Titanic. The Navy wasn't interested in financing a search for the lost ocean liner. But they were interested in finding two of their missing submarines, USS Thresher and USS Scorpion. The Navy eventually agreed they would finance Ballard's Titanic search only if he first searched for and investigated the two sunken submarines, which had sunk in the Atlantic in the 1960s. After that, he would be free to use any remaining time and resources to hunt for the Titanic. Alright folks, it's the ultimate game of give and take. The win-win strategy where everyone leaves with a smile. Think of it as the master plan for reasonable decisions. So, if you're aiming for the victory dance, why not toss someone else a win first? It's like a winning boomerang. You throw it out, and boom, it comes back to you. So, gear up to be the champion of giving wins and watch the good vibes bounce right back at ya. The Navy commissioned Ballard and his team to carry out a month-long expedition every year for 4 years, to keep Argo Jason in good working condition. The search would provide an ideal opportunity to test Argo Jason. In 1984, the Navy sent Ballard and Argo to map the wrecks of the sunken nuclear submarines USS Thresher and USS Scorpion, lost in the North Atlantic at depths of up to 9,800 feet, aka 3,000 meters. Ballard used Argo on a secret U.S. Navy mission to explore two sunken submarines. Using Argo, Ballard quickly located the missing submarines and gleaned a key lesson in the process about how shipwrecks behave as they sink. The submarines had broken up as they sank, debris spilled out from them across more than a mile of the seafloor, and was sorted by the currents, so that light debris drifted furthest away from the site of the sinking. This debris field was far larger than the wrecks themselves. By following the comet-like trail of debris, the main pieces of wreckage could be found. Surely the Titanic had also broken apart as it sank, Ballard realized. Furniture and dishes and other objects would have spilled out and been carried by ocean currents. Ballard assumed that the Titanic's debris could lead to the main part of the wreck. Prior to the 1985 expedition, the search area for the Titanic was narrowed down to a 100 square mile, aka 259 square kilometer zone. This refinement was achieved through a comprehensive approach that involves studying historical records, analyzing ocean currents, assessing debris, drift patterns, and leveraging the expertise of the research team led by Dr. Robert Ballard. These collective efforts successfully identified a targeted area where the Titanic was likely to be located. Ballard decided that extra help would be needed because of lack of time. He approached the French National Oceanographic Agency, IFREMER, aka Institut Français de Recherche pour l'exploitation de la mer, aka French Research Institute for Exploitation of the Sea. The collaboration with IFREMER was a significant aspect of this expedition. The agency had recently developed a high-resolution side-scan sonar, and agreed to send a research vessel, Le Serrois, to survey the seabed in the area where the Titanic was believed to lie. By the way, side-scan sonar is a remote sensing device that sends sound waves sideways across the ocean floor, creating detailed maps. This technology allowed researchers to efficiently cover large areas, identify anomalies on the seabed, and map the terrain in high resolution. IFREMER spent 5 weeks, from the 5th of July to the 12th of August 1985, mowing the lawn, sailing back and forth across the 100 square mile, aka 259 square kilometer target area to scan the seabed in a series of stripes. However, they found nothing, though it turned out that they had passed within a few hundred yards or meters of the Titanic in their first run. Yep, that's a near miss. But they had eliminated more than 75% of the search area. The responsibility of locating the Titanic now fell on the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, aka WHOI team, led by Ballard, aboard the research vessel Nor without the help of a large area mapping system to find Titanic. After Ballard finished the missions for the Navy, Nor, a research vessel owned by the U.S. Navy and operated by the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution at the time, arrived on site on August 22, 1985, and deployed Argo, the remote-controlled submersible. They did not have much time to explore, as others were waiting to take Nor on other scientific pursuits. Only 12 days would remain at the end of this expedition to search for Titanic. Ballard realized that looking for the wreck itself using sonar was unlikely to be successful and adopted a different tactic. Drawing on the experience of the surveys of Thresher and Scorpion, he would look for the debris field instead, using Argo's cameras rather than sonar. While sonar could not distinguish human-made debris on the seabed from natural objects, cameras could. The debris field would also be a far bigger target, stretching 1 nautical mile, aka 1.9 kilometers or longer, whereas the Titanic itself was only 90 feet, aka 27 meters wide. Using that lesson of locating the missing submarines, they had Argo sweep back and forth round the clock across the ocean floor, looking for the Titanic's debris trail rather than the ship itself. They took shifts monitoring the video feed from Argo as it searched the ocean floor 2 miles below. In the coming days, Argo would reveal deep undersea canyons, giant boulders, and enormous holes in the ocean floor. But mostly the team saw nothing. The days ticked by with no sign of the Titanic, not even a glint of metal. Ballard started to panic. The U.S. Navy was paying for this mission and had provided the ship and equipment. It had given Ballard a strict deadline, after which he and his team would have to head home. Was Ballard's quest to find the Titanic going to end in failure yet again? On September 1, Ballard went to his cabin to catch a few precious hours of rest. He was exhausted and deeply discouraged. After a week's fruitless searching, at 12:48 a.m. on Sunday 1 September 1985, observers noted anomalies on the otherwise smooth ocean floor. At first, it was pockmarks, like small craters from impacts. Finally, pieces of debris began to appear on Nor's screens. Ballard was called back to the deck. He hurried to the control room and found his team studying an image on one of the screens. It appeared to be an enormous metal object covered in rust. His heart pounding, Ballard realized that what he was looking at was one of the Titanic's boilers, a part of the ship's engines. Soon other images appeared. A piece of twisted metal, portholes, a banister. Cheers erupted. This is a wow moment for the whole team. And shortly thereafter, the hull was discovered. Argos sent out the first pictures of the Titanic since her sinking, 73 years before. They had done it. In 1985, Robert Ballard took 8 days to locate the RMS Titanic approximately 370 miles off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada. The wreck rests about 13,000 feet, aka 4,000 meters, underwater. The discovery of the Titanic wreckage marked a historic moment in deep-sea exploration. The ship wreckage was covered with what looked like rusty icicles, called rusticles, created by iron-eating microorganisms, which are consuming the wreck. FYI, the word rusticle was coined by Robert Ballard. These formations are actually communities of bacteria that slowly eat away at the ship's iron and give the shipwreck its melting appearance. A comparison of rusticle growth over time helps scientists to better understand Titanic's degradation, as well as that of other metal shipwrecks. In the remaining 4 days, Ballard and his team made even more astonishing discoveries. It turned out, the ship had dramatically cracked in half just moments before it took its final plunge. The front part of the ship was a third of a mile away from the back and that the stern was in far worse shape than the bow. They found jewels and dishes and shoes scattered across the seafloor. The eventual success in 1985 brought the iconic shipwreck into the spotlight, not only providing unprecedented insights into its condition and historical significance, but also contributing to advancements in underwater exploration and deep-sea archaeology. The discovery of the Titanic was a result of meticulous planning, significant investments, technological innovation, and collaborative efforts between American and French teams. The use of advanced sonar systems and remotely operated vehicles played a pivotal role in locating and documenting the Titanic wreckage, contributing to our understanding of this iconic and tragic event in maritime history. But in those first exhilarating moments of discovery, a chill ran through his heart. Ballard thought of the people who'd been on board. His mind filled with their voices, their cries. He hadn't found just an empty shipwreck. He'd found the final resting place of a magnificent ship of dreams and of the thousands who lost their lives on that night in 1912. Dr. Ballard's team refrained from taking or removing any artifacts from the site. In other words, Hui and if Bremer didn't pursue salvage rights to the Titanic wreckage because their primary mission was scientific research. And they operated within ethical considerations and followed international protocols that prioritize the protection of underwater cultural heritage. The Titanic, as a historic shipwreck, is also a gravesite for the individuals who lost their lives in the 1912 disaster. Their decision was likely influenced by these factors. In short, seeking salvage rights, engaging in commercial activities, and the potential disturbance of the site were not aligned with their core objectives and principles. Even though removing anything would have meant that Ballard and his team were the owners of the site according to the laws of the sea. Instead, they photographed and documented the ship and its condition, leaving a commemorative plaque to honor those who perished on the Titanic. Choosing not to take anything from the site left the Titanic open for salvage rights by the first salvager to bring up an artifact. Ballard still vividly remembers that moment when he first set eyes on the Titanic.
Our team's mood changed quickly as it got closer to the wreckage site. We realized we were dancing on someone's grave, and we were embarrassed. The mood, it was like someone took a wall switch and went click. And we became sober, calm, respectful, and we made a promise to never take anything from that ship, and to treat it with great respect. You don't go to Gettysburg with a shovel. You don't take belt buckles off the Arizona.
His stance remained consistent in many other interviews. He originally planned to keep the exact location a secret to prevent anyone from claiming prizes from it. He considered the site a cemetery, and refused to desecrate it by removing artifacts. Of course, they know the artifacts can fetch a significant sum, like stumbling upon a goldmine or a pyramid bonanza in the deep sea. But money isn't the sole consideration. It appears that other factors held more weight for them than the lure of substantial wealth. By the way, so, you probably watched Titanic and thought, the expedition leaders just after that shiny heart-shaped diamond necklace, aka, the heart of the ocean, rather than finding the ship, right? Well, as you just heard the story, turned out. It wasn't quite the treasure hunt we had in mind. It wasn't about diamonds. It was all about the legendary Titanic itself. He simply wanted to see it out of pure curiosity. So, forget the movie plot. Reality just one-upped fiction. Alright folks. Gather round for a life lesson. Don't let the dollar signs be your only compass. Okay? Don't let the dollar signs be your only compass. Whether you're prowling a job market like a famished wolf on the hunt, launching that business like a confetti cannon at a party, or even indulging in a lavish hotel vacation in Hawaii. Cool. By the way, you should make decisions with a 360-degree view. Alright, that's enough detour. Let's get back to the Titanic story. The expedition's successful discovery marked a historic breakthrough, capturing the world's attention. It made headlines around the world, generating significant media coverage and public interest. The images and footage from the exploration further fueled fascination with the Titanic and its tragic history. Ballard, now the Titanic Man, became world famous overnight. Upon discovering the wreck, the Titanic Man could have easily asserted salvage rights, just by picking up a mere cup of tea. But, he considered that grave robbing and chose to leave the Titanic as he found it. But that decision opened Pandora's box, unleashing another captivating story to unfold in the next chapter.